to talk some more. And I need to remember, let me write that down right now for the kids at home, that business about the crisis. I will send that to you electronically, so you also have a chance to memorize that. Just a couple of paragraphs at the start of Thomas Paine's pamphlet. Did we talk about that in this class? I don't know how far we are. Okay, well, let's take a look and see what we have. We've been through Sam Adams, huh? We talked about propaganda. We've been through Bear Aspirin. We've been through the crisis. Close the next credit date. Do we do Patrick Henry? No. Okay. Patrick Henry, the third of the firebrands. He was a Southerner. He was from the colony of Virginia. Excuse me, he made his famous speech to the Virginia House of Burgesses, which was their elected legislative body. And Patrick Henry, as I told you before, man, I wish I could have heard him speak, because his nickname was a son of thunder, so I would have loved to have heard that voice. I'm guessing that probably sounded like Annalise. Oh, sorry, Annalise. Anyway, so he was a great orator. What's an orator? What's an orator? Go ahead, buddy. A person who speaks publicly, yeah. An orator is a speaker. Orare. I'll just throw that in for Mr. Urbanski's benefit. And did we talk about this, the words before, give me liberty or give me death?
Yeah, you said it was something like
Right. So often nowadays people say, oh, but at least there'd be peace. Oh, but at least I'd be safe. And what the founding fathers were saying was, is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. They were saying, oh, no. It would be much better to fight or to die than it would be to live as a slave. So, he's the last of the firebrands. You had Samuel Adams up north from Massachusetts. He was the agitator, the person that kept things stirred up. He's the guy who wanted everyday people to say, I hate the British. You had Thomas Paine from Pennsylvania, one of the middle colonies. He's the guy who wrote these short tracts with just a few arguments in them, saying, hey, it just takes common sense. Or, my gosh, we're in a crisis here. And he was talking about, we have to make a decision, we need to get rid of Britain. And finally, you have Patrick Henry with his fiery speeches, convincing people that, no, we need to move away from British rule. It's time for us to stand by ourselves. What happened? Sure. Okay. Then, of course, one of the other most important things is the man could wear his hair. The curls are very sharp. I know that Chloe is immediately after this leaving for the beauty parlor, where she will be having big Hondo curls put on both sides. Sorry, babe, but you would have to be growing for a long time to get a nose like that, though. And that guy had a hunker. Okay, their copy. It's in the notes, I believe. They're on Google Classroom. You got it?
no.
How close are you? Who still needs it up? Anybody?
We can copy it tonight.
All right, we'll keep him happy. Tamale gets this one. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're off to something else. That was the end of the fire. Okay, let's not just dissolve in a conversation. That was the end of the firebrand. Now let's take a look over here. Oh, pain. All right, see here. All right, guys, settle down, relax, chill out. Be cool, fool. Take a chill pill, Bill. All right, let's stay here. That was So I need 22 out of here. All right, sorry about that. I brought up the wrong one. I brought the one that's just words, and I wanted the one that had some other things put in there. Hi, what would you like? Want a kid? Okay. He looks suspicious. He's perfectly healthy. He just looks suspicious. Okay. All right, here we go. Lesson 22, Writs and the First Continental Congress. That's what FCC is. The First Continental Congress. Now, when you're taking notes, here's a big clue. When you have something that takes a long time to write out, like Declaration of Independence, First Continental Congress, Second Continental Congress, what you want to do is write it one time. Maybe highlight it in a different color, but put an abbreviation down. So, for example, Declaration of Independence, put capital D, capital O, capital I, and then equals Declaration of Independence. Write it out one time. And the rest of the time when you're taking notes, just write capital D, capital O, capital I. The reason I use that capital O is it just makes it stand out more. Oh yeah, Declaration of Independence doesn't get lost with other letters. So you can do that with FCC, with SCC, with anything that takes a long time to write, which you may have to write out several times. Yeah.
Do we have to write it out for them?
You would have to write it out fully on a test one time. It's like with a person's name where you have to use their first and last name. And then after that, you can just use the last name. All right, here we go. Writs of assistance. Those are, here comes the definition, overly broad search warrants. Overly broad search warrants. B-R-O-A-D. Overly broad search warrants. Yeah, buddy. S-E-A-R-C-H space W-A-R-R-A-N-T. A-N-T. Okay. Overly broad search warrants. What happens today is that, let's suppose that somebody calls up the police and says, you know what, we think, well, frankly, we think Tanvy's dealing drugs, okay? So the police go over and they set up an undercover car over there in the cemetery. And they get their little binoculars out and they get their little cameras out and they're watching. You know, here comes a bus and some kids get off. And here comes, you know, some cars and kids get out. And here comes a stretch Lexus limousine. And this guy gets out, and when he leans forward to open the door for her, the police notice he's got a gun and, you know, under his shoulder there. And then he gets out, she gets out, and goes around the back, and he takes what appears to be a bag of stuff that looks kind of suspicious and hands it to Tanvi, and she goes into the school. And the police keep watching, and at the end of the day, Tanvi comes out with what appears to be a bag full of $100 bills and gets back in the car, you know, picked up by the guy in the stretch limousine. That seems a little suspicious. Well, nowadays, the police would say, okay, we want to investigate further. We think we've now spotted something. No, so we think we've now spotted something, but we can't just go busting in and look around any place we want to. People have their right to privacy. So what the police would do would be they would go to a judge, and the judge would say, well, what makes you think that there's been a crime? And they would present their information, and he would say, okay, where do you want to search? And the police would say, we would like to search that stretch Lexus limousine. We would like to search her locker at school, her backpack, and her house. Okay, so the judge says, all right, when are you going to do this? And they say, Tuesday morning. Okay, I'll sign off for Tuesday morning. And what are you looking for? We are looking for drugs, for money, for guns, drug paraphernalia. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so the judge signs off on this. This would be considered a reasonable search because they're only looking for a few things. They have a reasonable suspicion that these things might be there, that these things are illegal. So they would get a search warrant and be able to do that. lawfully go into the house, whether or not she gives permission, go into her locker, whether or not she gives permission, go into her backpack, whether or not she gives permission, so that they can look and see if this crime has in fact been done. On the other hand, back in colonial days, the British had these things called writs of assistance. And they were, hang on a second, they were overly broad. That means they didn't really say where they were looking or when they were looking. It just kind of gave them permission to look. Didn't even necessarily specify for what. So they went to a magistrate, a colonial judge, and they said, you know what? Gus is kind of suspicious. We want to go search. And the judge might sign that writ of assistance, and then, well, they go over, they search Gus's locker and Gus's backpack and Gus's house and Gus's car. But then they say, you know what? Actually, Gus was hanging around with Daniel the other day. Let's go search Daniel's house and Daniel's car and Daniel's, I think they went over to his dad's office. Let's search his dad's office. And so it's just way overly broad. What are we looking for? I don't know. Stuff. Bad stuff. Okay, I got bad news for you. There's something illegal in every one of your houses. I have no idea what it is. I mean, do you have a, please don't tell me these things, but do you have a towel that somebody took from a hotel? All right, that's illegal. Do you have a souvenir cup you took from a restaurant or well, you didn't pay for it, it's illegal. If nothing else, does all your wiring and plumbing and everything else exactly come up to code? Probably not, because it did when your house was built, but now it's been a few years, and so codes change, things are different. If you sold it today, it might say you have to change this. Anyway, so these overly broad search warrants allowed the British to go in and, geez, they could look for all kinds of stuff, all kinds of places, at all kinds of times. It became a harassment thing. And the man who argued against these was a man named James Otis. James Otis was a brilliant man. He would have been known as one of our best founding fathers, except he made a very big sacrifice to the revolution. And that was, remember when I talked with, whose face did I hit in this class? Riley's, okay. Whose face did I hit? Come on, I hit somebody with the butt of a gun. Okay, yeah, okay, that was Riley. All right, so remember when I hit Riley? Well, a customs officer actually did hit James Otis in the head with a musket, and he was never the same. He was a brilliant man, and sometimes he would still be a brilliant man. He believed in the cause, but something had been jarred loose up there, and sometimes he would just say things which were supposed to be secret. He would just talk about whatever was in his mind, and if he said, gee, we're going to go dump tea in the harbor. They couldn't have him do that. And so they had to cut him out of the discussions in the committees of correspondence of where he lived, which was Massachusetts. They couldn't allow him to be a part of it anymore because sometimes he just would say something somewhere. So that's a huge sacrifice to make. This man that was so brilliant lost a little piece of his mind for the revolution. But he argued in court, and he was still perfectly reasonable at this point in time. A colonist, was arrested on the basis of a writ of assistance. And so he argued, he said, well, you know what? This is really a bad thing. The king over in his palace is comfortable and safe in his possessions and safe in his home. And I don't know if you ever heard this expression, it's a common one, but his argument was, a man's home is his castle. Any man, any woman, any child should be safe at home from any kind of search or seizure that doesn't have a reasonable search warrant. And those writs of assistance aren't reasonable. We're not having, again, our rights as British citizens if we're just if the government's allowing the police, the customs officers to just come in and look around for bad stuff. So he lost the case because he said, you are hurting our natural rights. You're taking away our natural rights, our life, our liberty, our property. But of course, he's arguing in a British court, and the British didn't believe in natural rights. What did they believe in? Divine right of kings. Excellent. Okay. Now, what kind of questions did you guys have? Yes, sir. Did this happen in a movie?
Oh, yeah.
I,
Matilda. Yeah, yeah. Matilda.
oh, okay, I'm not sure we can base a really good conversation on Matilda. So it's a little bit, what was the principal's name?
Mrs. Brunier. It was Rose.
Wasn't she the Shrek or the Shrunk or what? She had a nickname for it.
Yeah, Shrek.
Yeah.
Toby. And then they shot people in the closet and we'll dance.
Now that part I like, shutting kids in the closet with kids. All right, settle down now. Everybody got this? Writs of assistance, well, things are starting to accelerate. You had the Boston Massacre, and it was a couple of years before they had the Boston Tea Party, but then it's not too long before they're arguing writs of assistance. They still have the committees of correspondence. Those are set up now. They can communicate with each other. And they are also still trying to work through the idea of working together. The Stamp Act Congress had worked so well when they all got together in a room. They said, we need to do that again. It's too hard. It takes too long to communicate between all of the colonies. So what we need to do is we need to get together. They chose Philadelphia. Now, if you take a look, Philadelphia, we're up here, okay? It's not too far from the middle of the country, and population-wise, at that time, it's probably fairly close. All right, they said, we'll get together in Philadelphia, and we will have a Congress. This came out of the committees of correspondence. They were saying, yeah, we need to talk, and we need to talk faster. So why don't we just send a couple of people from each committee or from each colony? Everybody came except Georgia. Georgia has a unique position down here. And that is, whereas these guys, the French are gone. They don't need the protection of Britain. The Spanish are still right down here. Not on the Floridas at this particular point. It wouldn't be very long before they were back in the Floridas. But they're down here in the Caribbean all over. Lots of Spanish shipping comes through here. They still kind of need the help of the British Navy to feel strong because these guys aren't a country yet. They're just separate colonies and they don't have navies. But again, this is so important. The British colonies were working together one more time. That's just huge. They're not considering themselves only loyal to their separate country. They are saying, all right, we have to do this thing together. There is somebody else there. Hello. Wait a minute, they're all writing. Except for Claire, who's dancing and jumping around like a ballerina in the back of the room, but we can't show you that right now. Ooh, she just did a triple flip. That was cool. All right, gotta get moving again, guys. You're gonna get this off the notes now. Just a quick thing. I'm gonna shut down the computers in here after the next test because I don't want you going off the computers. I want you ahead of time to take the notes off Google Classroom, copy them into your notebook, leaving a little bit of space. That's the way to learn to take notes. As the year goes on, I will eventually stop giving you very many notes. I will say things like, okay, we're going to talk about the First Continental Congress, you take notes, and I won't give you the other four places. So you need to learn to take the notes. And the first step now is I'm giving you the gift of a whole lot of them. But the way to get that into your head is to write it out, not under the pressure of, I'm taking this time, I can't really listen to you, I need to slow people down because I've got to write the notes out. Write them out ahead of time. That's the way to be prepared for class. Okay, cool. Oh, things are looking rough up in Boston. Boston, the harbor's closed. The town is starving out. Lots of the patriots have actually gone into the countryside. Not all, but there are a couple of big ones who have gone out there. Sam Adams and John Hancock. Sam Adams, we know, was the great agitator, and John Hancock was one of the richest men in the colonies, and he backed the patriots. So these were considered pretty dangerous men by the British. But the British hadn't done any arresting. They hadn't hanged anybody. They hadn't thrown anyone in jail or put anybody in a pillory yet. They were trying to calmly walk through it. At least General Gage was. He was trying to keep this from getting any worse than it was. Well, the Americans, the patriots, figured out a system to warn the people out in the countryside. Because not only were they protecting some of their patriot leaders like John Hancock and Sam Adams, but also they had been thinking, this might turn into a shooting war. And if this turns into a shooting war, we have to be prepared for it, which means it's time for us to start collecting the weapons of war. All right, now when you think about going to war, all right, James is going to go to war. He might go look around the house and say, okay, I have steak knives and a scissors. That's probably not enough. He's probably going to want a little more sophisticated weapon. Now, back then, they might have had the kind of guns that a farmer would have. Something to shoot a squirrel or a raccoon or a deer, maybe something big for a mountain lion, but not really the weapons of war. So they started to collect those. Also things like, how about a bayonet, that big sword that goes on the end of a musket or a rifle? And how about things like a cannon? Could we possibly get a hold of a cannon, in which case we'd need cannonballs? Do we need some kind of uniform, something to identify us as one side or the other? So they had to start collecting these things, and they were storing them out in a little town called Concord, capital C-O-N-C-O-R-D, Concord, Massachusetts. Not Concord, New Hampshire, Concord, Massachusetts, capital C-O-N-C-O-R-D. And that's where all the supplies were. That's where Sam Adams was. That's where John Hancock was. And the Patriots had set up a spy system inside of Boston. All these soldiers walking around, having conversations, sitting at bars, having a beer or an ale or whatever they drink in those days, and talking about it. I mean, young men, they like to talk about their martial prowess. Boy, I'm going to be a great soldier here. I'm going to get famous doing this or that or the other things. And the officers would draw up the plans, they thought. So they were keeping their eyes open, the Patriots were. And they found out that there was going to be a set of British soldiers marching out and a certain distance. They knew they'd be going a certain distance. They overheard this. And so they said, well, what's out there? Concord is out there. They're heading to Concord. They must know about our supplies. They're going to go after John Hancock, Sam Adams, and all of our weapons that we've put there. So they had to have a way to get out and warn people, because remember, Boston was closed. It was hard to get out even by land. It was impossible to get out by ship. And so they set up this system where they would try to get people out, and then someone would hang a lantern up in the steeple of the Old North Church, and they would give a signal whether the British were moving out on land or by sea. How were they crossing? They'd just be crossing the harbor, but leaving on land from a different part of the colony. So they had to make sure they knew where they were going. And they kept their ears open for when it happened, and then they got 3 people out to try to ride and spread the alarm. Now, who spread the alarm? Okay, it wasn't actually Paul Revere. Well, Paul Revere did try to ride and spread the alarm, but Paul Revere was arrested, and he was released later, but he didn't get all the way through to Concord. There was another guy. Here's Paul Revere. He gets the Studley picture. Then there was William Dawes, who went out pretending to be kind of drunk, and he managed to get out there, and then he was a good rider. Boom, he ran off, and he was arrested. He was released later, too. There was a fella out there in the countryside, Dr. Samuel Prescott, and it was actually Dr. Samuel Prescott who made it all the way to Concord, who warned the Patriots, who moved all of the military supplies, and Sam Adams and John Hancock left. Well, along came the British troops marching out towards Concord. Partway there, there's a little town that they march through. The road comes, there's a little bridge there, goes over, then the road continues. That little town is called Lexington, Massachusetts. And right there on Lexington Green, that shared common area in the middle of the town, right where the bridge is, here comes the British Army. And they had close to 1,000 people with them. This is not a small thing. And here come these soldiers, and they're marching, and these guys are battle tested. They've been fighting the French. They know what they're doing. These are experienced soldiers. And they get to the bridge, and on the other side, there are a bunch of colonists, farmers, a few dozen, not many, not well armed, and not well organized. And the leader of the British, his name was Major Pitcairn, you don't have to remember that, but the leader of the British simply says, "Disperse ye rebels." Like, this is a joke. Get out of our way with the British Army. And so they don't. They stop. They stay. They say, "No, you can't go past us." The British Army is very good at fighting in an open field. They simply move some of their rank out. All these guys stand shoulder to shoulder, and given the command, they load up their weapons. They're in 3 rows. The first row raises their weapons. They're told to aim. They aim at the Patriots over there on the other side. And when they're told to fire, they're all standing shoulder to shoulder. Muskets are very inaccurate, but all those musket balls are flying over. They killed a few of the Patriots. I mean, they tore them up. And the next rank advanced, they were going to do the same thing. And by the time the third rank came around, the Patriots weren't going to be around there anymore. They couldn't stand up to that kind of fighting. That's not the way Americans had learned to fight. Okay, this is huge. This is enormous. This is called the shot heard around the world. The shot heard around the world, not because that was a really big gun. Oh my goodness. It was the shot heard around the world because it started a new age. They'd still be in the age of sail, but now they were also in the age of revolution. This is the first time that one of the possessions owned by one of the European empires rose up and said, "Yeah, we're not going to be your colonies anymore." So this started the American Revolution. These are the first shots of the American Revolution, the shot heard around the world. And when you think about the world, Europe owned a lot of it. They owned all of the Americas. They owned large chunks, particularly coastal Africa. They owned a lot of the Orient and India and a lot of the world. And when you think about it now, Europe doesn't own very much. It started with the Americans saying, "We don't want to be your colonies anymore." And then just run through and look at all the revolutions all over South and Central America, all over Africa, all over Asia, that the people threw off their European masters, and it started here. That's why this is the shot heard around the world. It issued in the age of revolution. Remember when you say an age of something? That means that's the thing that's driving the world forward at that time. So they are still in the age of sail, but they're also now in the age of revolution. It's like we're in the technology age, and we're also in the space age still. I mean, there's still things, we're still heading out there to other planets. Someday we hope to visit Haley's home planet. Not sure we'll get there, but we'll try. Yes, sir. That was the shot. They're on Lexington Green, the area in the middle of Lexington. That's where the first shot of the American Revolution was fired. Massachusetts. Yeah. They were going to Concord. This happened at Lexington, partway there. Okay, now the rest of the story. So the British continued on. I mean, they just brushed the Americans aside, and they continue on to Concord. When they got to Concord, the arms had been moved. Sam Adams and John Hancock were gone, so the British got out there, and they didn't get anything. So now they had to march back. But there were a group of people called the Minutemen. You heard of Minutemen? Yeah. All right, Minutemen were patriots who drilled like militias and they had said, we'll be ready at a minute's notice. And I'm talking really not much more than that. So you're sitting there having dinner and somebody rides by and says, hey, the British are coming, turn out. You take another bite, put the sandwich down, grab your gun, grab your ammunition pack, and walk out the door. They knew where they were going to meet, because if we all drill over at Cha-Cha's house, he's our captain, then if somebody says the British are coming, turn out, then boom, off we go to Cha-Cha's house. He will have received word from higher up, from General Clairvaux. He will have found out where his troops are supposed to go. That's what the riders were doing. They were running around the countryside saying, the British are coming, turn out. Well, like I said, 2 of them were stopped. One of them got through to Concord that had the warning, but they'd alerted a lot of Minutemen. So Minutemen started appearing along the route back. Now, the British were totally unable to fight the kind of war that the Americans were fighting. See, here's what the Americans did. They weren't going to line up again like they did at Lexington. They would come and they would hide behind a rock or a tree, stand up, boom, shoot a British guy, and then run away. Go somewhere else, reload, wait behind a rock or a tree. When the British finally march by again, stand up, shoot a British guy, and disappear. It's really hard to do it slow choreo. So the Americans weren't standing to fight. Now the British, on the other hand, didn't know how to do this, because what they were used to doing was fighting other big European armies on the plains of Europe. So they'd be marching along, left, and enough of them would be shot that the commander would say, company, halt. Sergeant Major Grimsley. Somewhere down the line, Sergeant Major Grimsley would go, sir. Yes, sir. Take 4 men and go after that rascal. Yes, sir. Jones, Smith, Hyde, White. 1 step to your left. March. Port, arms. Forward at a quick time. March. Where's the rebel by now? About a mile down the road. Okay. So they weren't catching any of these guys. They weren't shooting any of these guys. And it was frustrating the bejeebers out of them. And they're marching. They're nearly 1,000 guys back. And all those guys is target practice for the Americans. So by the time they get back to Boston, some of them have literally thrown their muskets down and are running to get back into Boston, because then they're under the protection of the ship's guns out in the harbor. The naval guns could fire at the Patriots chasing them. And there's also some soldiers up at the neck, which is the thin part of land where you go into Boston from the land. They were afraid. They were beaten and they were really angry. Because think about it. These are these battle-hardened, experienced soldiers. These guys are the best of Britain, which is arguably the best army in the world. And they have just been kicked by a bunch of farmers in Massachusetts who are colonials and Americans. So they're not happy people. They're shocked, they're angry, and they're a little bit afraid because they don't know how to deal with this. So the American Revolution starts. All right. Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, honey. You can shut that up, please, Chloe. Okay, there is something different about this test. I hope nobody went home. You're all home. Okay. Anyway, there's something different about this test. I am going to give you a take-home part. Listen to me. That is for you and you alone. On the bottom of it, it says, I swear that I have not received any kind of help on this section. Now that means mom can't come over and say, oh, let me just have a quick look-see, okay? You sure about that spelling? No, can't do that. This is totally your work. Think of it just as if you were sitting here in class. You're not asking your friends. You're not Googling. Not talk to the great God Google. Okay, you're not Googling. You're not doing anything like that. Just coming out of your mind. You have studied. For that, I don't actually care if you use your notes. You know, feel free with that. You can use your notes. You can't use anything else. But the critical point there is you are going to get that Wednesday night or Wednesday. You're going to do it Wednesday night. You're going to give it back to me Thursday when you take the other part of the test. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Are we going to have grandfather religion on this test?
Would I not give that to you? Of course I'll give that to you, sweetheart. I wouldn't deny you. Yes. Wait, shh. What? You can turn that back off. Okay, sweet. What? I refuse to answer that.
Yes, exactly what he just said. Good job, Carl.
Okay, what else have we got? Not that I see. Get up and run away or